Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather on this 5th day of June 2020. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, fire danger graphic here showing still the upper Yukon Valley there, Yukon Flats, from Porcupine River. That whole area up there is still in the extreme fire danger, not quite as extensive as it has been. And conditions improved out to the west, just some areas of high and very high fire danger in the central interior, and then the farther out toward the Selawik Valley and just there northeast of Norton Bay, that's mostly in the high category, and high also down into the greater Fairbanks area. Otherwise, the upper Yukon Valley still seeing the greatest fire danger, as it seems to have had ever since the snow left here couple of months ago. Moving on to the next image is a webcam view of Dehne Pass here looking north, and you can see thunderstorms breaking out actually from the southern Kenai Peninsula northward through Chugach Mountains, Talkeetnas, obviously in the Matanuska Valley here, and up all the way up to the southern Brooks Range, with the heaviest concentration of lightning strikes occurring, looked like northwest or on the northwest side of the Alaska Ranger around McKinley and Denali Park area back to the northwest, and actually it was starting to extend westward. But this shot looking north, you can see as you look a little farther to the west, pretty heavy precipitation, and the west shot here of the cam showing a pretty dark sky there with precipitation just beginning to fall there in kind of the left center, and probably ready to open up. Definitely lightning. I didn't get a shot of any lightning in the webcam shots, but definitely there was some around there, obviously. So pretty bumpy ride through Dehne Pass today. And otherwise, no warnings, watches, or advisories out anywhere around the state for the next 24 hours. Satellite imagery, not a lot to see here except that weak low there well southwest of the Queen Charlotte Islands, kind of spinning and dropping southeastward. And that left the southeast coast today. Generally fairly cloudy, some isolated showers, nothing significant. 0.05 of an inch fell today at Juneau and Ketchikan. A lot of other areas didn't see anything at all, with some sun breaks. Otherwise, over the interior, just developing showers and thunderstorms. You can see the lightening up, or the whitening building clouds there. Northern Kuskokwim Valley on up across the Yukon River there west of Fairbanks, and even into the central Brooks Range there on the southern slopes through the Koyukuk Valley, right up to the crest of the mountains. But on the north side, too stable, some low clouds, fog, and definitely much chillier conditions there. East winds continuing to blow 30 to 40 miles an hour on the eastern Arctic coast there, with a lot of clouds, low clouds, and areas of fog along the entire coastline. Winds lighter on the west side, but showers developing and spreading northwestward all the way to Cape Lisburne out of the Long Mountains. Otherwise, just fairly cloudy with light precipitation, just a few hundredths wherever it fell over the southwest interior. Westerly flow across the southern Bering Sea, carrying a pretty weak disturbance. A fair amount of clouds, though, and moisture, not so much precipitation-wise, but low cloud, fog, drizzle-wise. IFR creating a type of moisture there coming across the Bering Sea. And low pressure, weak low pressures. You could see the clouds kind of rotating from west or from east to west across Nunivak Island, suggesting a weak, say 1,016 millibar low there near the Pribilofs, or crossing the Pribilofs, with that brought about 1,500ths of an inch of rain to St. George Island earlier today, kind of in a break now. And that whole mass of moisture shifting down toward the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians, with Cold Bay picking about 100th of an inch, so nothing too heavy there. Winds light out all across that area, and in the northern Bering Sea, very light variable winds leading to low clouds and fog right up into the Chukchi Sea, And again, as I mentioned, areas of the Arctic coast, thunderstorms around, northeast Kachemak Bay there and the Kenai Peninsula up into the interior areas, lesser toward the eastern border there, and extending up to the Brooks Range. And scattered showers, probably not as much as what I got drawn in there, but just also some sun breaks and pretty good clearing along the eastern North Gulf Coast around Yakutat and into the offshore area as well. Partly to mostly sunny for Kodiak Island. That'll continue tonight. Light west-northwest breezes. It'll keep it dry and maybe a few clouds for Kodiak, but nothing significant. And that system just washes out as the moisture stacks up on the Bering Sea side of both the Fox Islands and Alaska Peninsula, but showers even on the south side, Sandpoint, maybe Chignik, but nothing heavy. Thunderstorms gradually diminish, but showers will persist, and maybe even areas of light rain over the west central interior through the night and into tomorrow morning. Lesser wind on the eastern Boulevard Sea coast, and basically dry for the Panhandle as all that moisture shifts off to the southeast and stays in Canada. And for the Saturday forecast, risk of some showers over the eastern Panhandle, especially in the south, over along the border, but out toward the coast, dry, variably cloudy, and maybe some sunshine at times. Otherwise, south central Alaska, again, chance of thunderstorms. Once again, from the Kenai Peninsula up through the Kuskokwim, Matanuska, Susitna valleys, all the way up to the Brooks Range, mostly through the central interior. Should stay dry and mostly sunny. Temperatures in the 70s, upper Yukon Valley, maybe in the Tanana Valley areas, and 60s to near 70, south central Alaska. And light winds, low clouds and fog for much of the northern Bering Sea. Throw some light rain and drizzle in with that warm front spreading in toward the Pribilofs and in toward Nikolsky during the day. And a widespread batch of light rain with that cold front pushing into the western Aleutians will definitely hit the Adak area tomorrow evening, but that whole system kind of deepens a little bit. Looks a little more impressive on Sunday as it drops down toward the Alaska Peninsula, so probably some solid light rain into Cold Bay Falls past King Cove, as well as on Alaska and Nikolsky, and that should be extensive enough to catch the Pribilofs on the north side. Less thunderstorm activity on Sunday afternoon, but still Kenai Peninsula, south central Alaska looking good. Back up to the northwest, showers over the Copper River Basin, dry and sunny. 70s, upper Yukon Valley, and probably upper 60s to lower 70s. Probably will be some sunshine in the Susitna Valley, as well as the Kenai Peninsula, to help trigger those thunderstorms and showers for the Panhandle. Lows tonight, upper 20s, lower 30s, Arctic coast into the North Slope. Otherwise, 40s to near 50 central interior. Mid to upper 40s, southern Alaska, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula. Lower 40s out over the Aleutians. Highs tomorrow, 60s to lower 70s in the sunnier areas there, maybe near 70 Copper River Basin. Lower 70s Fairbanks area, near 70 for Fort Yukon. Mid 30s on the Arctic coast. 50s to lower 60s for the Panhandle, followed by lows in the upper 40s. Or mid 40s south to lower 50s up towards Skagway for the Panhandle, otherwise 40s over the interior, followed by highs Sunday afternoon. A little warmer, 70-75 central and eastern interior, 70 forecast for Ambler, and probably into the lower 70s, areas of East Anchorage on up into the Matanuska-Susitna Valley areas, Copper River Basin, 65 to 70, and 50s to upper 60s in the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic Saturday morning. IFR up along the Arctic coast and marginal VFR to the south of the Brooks Range, central eastern interior VFR, and some IFR up along the North Gulf Coast, southern Prince William Sound, and marginal VFR central and north outer coastal areas of the Panhandle. Bering Sea, Aleutian, solid IFR from St. Lawrence Island southward. And for the afternoon, no change out west there. Maybe a few areas of marginal VFR showing up around Adak and on Alaska. Alaska Peninsula marginal, Sandpoint VFR. Kodiak Island looks VFR on up and across the Kenai Peninsula with some marginal VFR in central southern Cook Inlet. And some IFR right along the southeast coast, otherwise VFR in the interior. Some marginal VFR, though, the western Alaska Range into areas of the southern two-thirds of the Kuskokwim Valley. But the Yukon River Valley, VFR, Arctic Coast, IFR. IFR continues Sunday morning at Arctic Coast and pushing in across portions of the North Slope with marginal VFR not quite reaching the crest of the Brooks Range, so VFR from there southward. And then some IFR, Western Alaska Range into the Kuskokwim Valley, and also Montague Island along the North Gulf Coast, and then on down the Panhandle with marginal VFR over the inside waters. Still looking at pretty solid IFR flying conditions out over the Bering Sea from actually the Chukchi Sea southward to the Pribilofs and all of the Aleutian Chain to the Western Alaska Peninsula on up into Bristol Bay. And then for the afternoon, marginal VFR lingering over southern southwest Kodiak Island, marginal for Bristol Bay. Marginal VFR zone still there in the Kuskokwim Valley, Western Alaska Range, but VFR for south central Alaska, marginal for Prince William Sound. And from about Seward on up to Cordova, northeastward into the Wrangell Mountains. IFR Cape Yakataga over to just west of Elfin Cove, marginal VFR for the Panhandle. And VFR in the interior, Arctic coast, especially the central coast, looking at IFR throughout the entire day. Passes Anatuvik, VFR, same forecast for Adigan, VFR either approach. Lake Clark and Merrill, occasionally marginal with risk of thunderstorms. And rainy VFR, chance of a thunderstorm in the area. Same forecast for windy, VFR. Isabel looking good with VFR flying. Mintest also VFR. And Tanita VFR. Portage starting out marginal, burning off to VFR in the afternoon, and Chilkoot and White, VFR. Freezing levels, 8,000 feet over the far eastern Alaska Range into Canada, otherwise 6,000 feet, much of interior Alaska all the way up to and off the Arctic coast. A little cooler, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, Alaska Peninsula, about 4,000 feet. Then edging back up to 6,000 and then 8,000 feet over the southwest Bering and the western Aleutians. Icing, some mixed icing over the southeast coast as well as Kenai Peninsula northward through the central interior to the Brooks Range. Areas of mixed icing there, mostly light, maybe isolated moderate. And then rime icing sliding into the Bering Sea there and back down over the western Aleutians with that weak frontal system. And moving on to the jet stream, upper level high persisting still north of the Arctic coast there over the Arctic Ocean, putting weak northeast flow in, turning easterly, but cutting up to about 50 knots across the Norton Sound, Yukon Delta area, and then coming back around the two upper lows out over the Bering Sea. Westerlies across the southern Bering, 70 to 90 knots. Main Pacific jet, though, well south of the area, and we've got weak low pressure off the or over the Gulf of Alaska. And at 9,000 feet, real light winds across all of interior Alaska, including the Panhandle, with several weak low centers in the south, a couple of weak high centers, one over the central interior, the other one near the Bering Strait, and a couple of weak ones out over the Bering Sea. Strongest winds aren't that strong. Westerlies, more or less, coming across the Aleutians and southern Bering Sea. And light winds in the Gulf of Alaska, same pattern, 9,000 feet, real light variable winds. Maybe a little brisk yet on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, where they're still carrying small craft or brisk wind advisories there. Anyway, light north winds off the Panhandle, light and variable over the inside waters. And from there, taking a look at turbulence, eastern Beaufort Sea coast with those continued easterly winds, occasional light to isolated moderate chop below 4,000 feet, especially for small aircraft. And also maybe for Kamishak Bay and the east side, lee side of Kodiak Island. After the break, I'll be back with the marine forecast.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, or GINA, based at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the show.
Well, Dave, it's great to be back. Thanks for inviting us again.
Sure thing. And today we want to talk about identifying burn scars. That would be the burned up area after a wildfire when the flames and the smoke are gone. We can see it if you drive by it on the roadway, of course, but from satellite, we can also identify those places on the land, right?
You know it. You know that expression, ouch, that's going to leave a mark?
Yeah.
After you bang your knee getting out of the car.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the ouch, it's going to leave a mark, that also applies to the landscape. Whenever a wildfire ravages through, it's going to leave a mark on the landscape. After a wildfire burns out, this is called a burn scar.
Okay.
And you can ask yourself, well, that's interesting. We can see a burn scar from space. Right. Then the question is, well, why does that matter?
Okay.
Who cares?
Yeah, fire's over.
Right, the fire is over. We don't need to worry about this anymore. It turns out you kind of do, because burn scars are important. There's this old rule of thumb in the weather business that flood follows fire. The action of the fire in killing off the vegetation, in baking, kiln drying the landscape a little bit, can hinder the land's ability to absorb rainfall. So if you have a fire, especially if it's in complex mountainous terrain. This is classic in California. It can happen somewhat in Alaska too. You get a wildfire in steep, hilly, or mountainous terrain, rips off all the vegetation off the landscape. Then 6 months later, there's a big rainstorm, and you get a flash flood in that area. So flood can follow fire. That's why you got to know where the burn scars are. Secondly, a fire needs fuel to maintain itself. So if there's an old burn scar left over from a year or two ago, and then another summer later here in Alaska in the interior, it's a big wildfire season. If there's a fire advancing toward an old burn scar, well, guess what? That old burn scar is going to be tougher terrain for that new fire to get through because there's not as much fuel in that burn scar. So they almost act like a natural fire break. These are a couple of reasons why you need to know where those burn scars are. Alaska Fire Service has limited resources. They want to put their people and their equipment where it does the most good. They need to know, well, this is an area where there's no burn scar. We better put people here because that fire could really run.
So really important for weather forecasters and fire weather forecasters for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But then how do weather satellites actually detect those burn scars?
Good question.
Thanks.
Well, let's turn the Wayback Machine to the summer of 2015. That was a very active year. We've got a picture here taken up in the White Mountains. This is one of the fires in progress that summer, and if you look real close, you can almost see Frodo throwing the ring into the volcano there. So that's quite the vision. Well, let's look at a visible image. Here we are in Alaska's interior. This is before the fires got out of the cage in early summer of 2015. Let's zoom into the western interior here. Again, this is a weather satellite image of visible light, what the human eye can see. We're into the middle reach of the Yukon Valley there in the western interior, Galena area. And this is just a beautiful visible day. Nothing much going on. It's in early June before the fires really got active. But then in 2015, the fires got loose, especially in that western interior. Here's another image. The same satellite pass as that visible image, but now we're not quite looking at visible light.
Very different.
There's a slight change here. This image incorporates something called the veggie band. 0.86 micron wavelength. The micron's very tiny, but that wavelength responds to vegetation, the chlorophyll. So trees and grasses reflect that part of the electromagnetic spectrum back to the satellite. And so the satellite sees that. When signal comes at that wavelength to the satellite, we know, there's some vegetation growing there. This is great. You can identify coastlines so easily because you go from vegetation to water. Turns out if you have a burn scar, guess what? You burned away the vegetation, so that's going to show up. We're going to do a before, during, and after kind of look here. And so we're looking at before. So in this image, we got a lot of green out there. That's wonderful. Another fun thing about this kind of imagery is you can see down in the Alaska Range in the southeast corner of the image, it's blue. That's glaciers and snow in the mountains. So this is not really what the human eye can see. This is these wavelengths are beyond human vision, but we've made them look certain colors. So the vegetation looks green. Now let's look at that same kind of satellite recipe, but during the fires. This is in July. The fires are loose. You can see the smoke in the middle of the image, the smearing look of the smoke, and then we can see some clouds that are white. Icy clouds are blue. So this is in July of 2015. The fires are doing their thing. We're burning up millions of acres. Now let's go to September. The fires are out. The audience has left the theater. You know, the event's over, right? We're done. But guess what? Now look at those brown patches.
Look at that.
All of those places are where the fire has burned away the vegetation. So you can see where the fires were. You can add up these perimeters, get acreage burned and such. And so that's good to know. Now remember, flood follows fire, and these are also natural fire breaks. So you need to know where these guys are. In the course of the 2015 summer season, we went from before with not much burn scar in this area to just a couple months later, we can see so much burn scarring on the landscape. What's interesting too about the satellite and looking at burn scars is you realize that burn scars are the gift that keeps on giving. You can forget that a couple of years ago maybe there was a fire in a certain area, but the satellite won't forget. So in the summertime we get wildfires in Alaska, but guess what? In the visible imagery here we can see the burn scars just a little bit, but they're not as prominent as in that veggie band. But then you can't see them at all if you cover them up with snow, right?
Exactly.
So here's an image from the middle of the winter time.
Wow.
And snow on the ground by this recipe looks blue. Again, these are wavelengths of light that the human eye can't really see. We're getting up into the infrared, near infrared. And the way we've assigned colors is if there's snow on the ground or there's a glacier, it looks blue, kind of intuitive. So this is early April of the following year, 2016.
Okay.
We're just about to get into breakup. We've got a lot of snow on the ground, and now it's all going to melt. And as the snow melts, then you get our final image here. Doesn't this look familiar? This looks like a lot of what we saw in September of the previous summer. So this is the spring of the next year. The fires themselves might not have overwintered, they're gone, but the fire scar does. And as the snow melts away, and then you have breakup, and then you have green up, whenever the leaves come out, the grass comes back, except in the burned areas, they're having a tough time because everything got burned off the previous year. So you can see these scars even the next summer, multiple years. It depends on what kind of vegetation there is. You know, some of the tussocky tundra grasses, they'll grow back really quick, but to get a forest to come back, that'll take much longer. So these burn scars, eventually the landscape will fill in the burn scar. It will heal itself, if you want to use that metaphor. But for the next few years, you can still keep track of these on satellite. And again, the reason we want to do that is that the burn scar can facilitate a flood, and it can act like a fire break. So there you are, the veggie
Fascinating
band.
tools. So if you're a weather satellite and you're looking at my bowl of vegetables here, you might be able to pick out which one's the pea, which one's the tomato, and which one's the carrot, and apply that information precisely to whatever it is you're working on there. That is really fascinating stuff, that we have that capability from so high above the planet Earth, and Alaska for that matter.
Yep,
Eric?
eat your veggies.
Yes, definitely. I think I will. I'm hungry. Thanks so much for joining us again, Eric, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We'll see you right here next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Today's sea ice analysis showing it thinning out pretty good, continuing. Still heavier ice, shore-fast ice there on the north side of the Seward Peninsula, and a lot of ice in toward Kotzebue Sound, as well as the western coast, but thinning out both on the east side, and on the east side north of Barrier Islands, and then on the west and northwest side there, and still some little bit of ice left in Norton Sound, but not much, as well as the north side of the St. Lawrence Island area. And of course, conditions continue to slowly melt for the next 4 or 5 days. And for the coastal water forecast, smoke craft advisories tomorrow on the south coast of the Panhandle, northwesterlies 25 to as high as 30 knots there along the coast of Prince of Wales Island. Clarence Strait, lighter, but still northwest, 15 seas 3 feet, and 10 knot winds from the north-northwest for the central and northern inside waters. North coast, northwest 20 knots, 5 to 6 foot seas. Outlook for Sunday. Lighter winds all along the coast, southwest breeze at 10 knots on the north coast, west 10 to 15 on the south coast. Clarence Strait, northwest winds at 15 knots with 3 foot seas. And southerlies at 10 knots for Stevens Passage. Lynn Canal, south winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. Prince William Sound and the eastern North Gulf Coast, winds will be out of the southwest at 10 knots, pretty light with 2 to 4 foot seas. Western North Gulf Coast, southwest 15, west 15 for both the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, 4 foot seas, and southern Cook Inlet southerlies at 15 knots, otherwise variable to southwest at 10 knots north of the Forelands. Look for southwest 15 in the afternoon, Sunday afternoon for northern Cook Inlet, 4 foot seas, otherwise southwest at 10 for the southern inlet, west 20 knots, Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Southwest winds for the North Gulf Coast at 10 knots. Also for Prince William Sound, light wind, seas 2 feet there and about 4 to 5 feet for the offshore areas. And for Bristol Bay, west winds tomorrow 20 knots, seas 3 feet, west-northwest 15 for the Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak Island, west-southwest 20 knots. For Sunday, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots there for Kodiak Island, and west-southwest 15 knots for the Alaska Peninsula, west winds at 15 for Bristol Bay. And for the Unalaska Island area tomorrow, northwest wind 15, seas 4 feet, Unmac Island, west 15 to 20, 5 foot seas, and west 20 for Adak and Atka with 4 to 5 foot seas. Southwest 20 knots from Chitka Island, and from Kiska to Shimia, small craft advisories. Southwest increasing to 25 knots with 8-foot seas. We'll swing around to the east on Sunday and come down to about 15 knots, and then from Amchitka toward Adak, northwest 25 knots. And on the Pacific side of the central Aleutians, small craft advisories west at 25. And for the Fox Islands, west-northwest winds at 20 knots with 6 to 7-foot seas. For the southwest coast, westerlies 10 to 15 knots, seas 3 feet. Light winds for the Pribilofs, northwest at 10, northwest 15 for St. Matthew Island, northeast 15, St. Lawrence Island. And for Sunday, northwest 15, St. Lawrence Island, and along the Yukon Delta coast, south of Nunivak Island, westerlies at 15 knots, seas 4 feet. And the St. Paul, St. George, Walrus Island area, northerlies at 20 knots, seas 4 feet, northwest 15, and 5-foot seas for St. Matthew Island. And small brisk wind advisories continue on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast for those sustained easterlies at about 25 knots, 20 knots central coast, much lighter on the west side, and northwest 15 with 3-foot seas for the Chukchi Sea. Sunday, a little less on the winds, but holding that brisk wind advisory for the far eastern zone there toward, say, Dead Horse to Demarcation Point. 25 knots out of the east, 15 knots on the central coast, 5 knots really laying down on the west side, and southerlies at about 15 for the Chukchi Sea. And for tonight, again, look for slowly diminishing winds, but they won't end altogether for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast with areas of low clouds and fog, and all the way even on the west side there. And through the Bering Strait, light winds over the Bering Sea, lots of IFR, and with the warm front, some light rain, fog, and drizzle. Showers as that area moisture stacks up along the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, but amounts will be light. Thunderstorms diminish over the interior. Tomorrow they reappear once again anywhere over south central Alaska, Kenai Peninsula, Kuskokwim Valley, central interior, and more showery with less thunderstorms, though, for the southwest coast. Rain spreads into the Pribilofs, light rain, fog, and drizzle, and that system moves to the Alaska Peninsula on Sunday. Otherwise, maybe a little warmer over interior Alaska with more 70s showing up. Thanks for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.